Welcome to the Tangles and Tunes channel. In today's art session, I want to help give you a boost to your own creativity. We're going to turn a charming cartoon penguin into an intricate Zentangle piece of art. And in so doing, we'll discover just how relaxing and rewarding art can be. So grab your pens and discover with me the hidden potential within your own playful sketches. And you'll see that we're starting with a larger piece of paper than normal in our channel work here. This is actually a 5.5 by an 8.5 inch sheet from one of my art and sketch books. I've left the perforations along the side, but just ignore that. That's so I can insert it back into my journal when I'm done. But we're going to start here with this, and we're going to use our pencils to begin, and we're going to sketch in our penguin shape. So follow with me. This is very, very simple to do, but just take your time, pause if need be, and we'll get through this and get into our Zentangle work here momentarily. So if you look at this drawing area, we want to try to center our character there. So we're going to put his head up top, which is just a U shape, a shape of an upside down U. Just give him that little bit of a head there. Hopefully you can see that well enough on the camera. And then we're going to just bring that down a little bit, and we're going to widen that out and give him kind of like a bowling pin shape, if you can think of that, or a little Russian stacking dolls. They kind of have this shape. We're just making a cartoon penguin, so it doesn't have to be super precise. And we're giving him that shape, and then we're going to take right around where his neck would be. We want to make a little spot here with a slightly downward curve in this line. What I've done here is I've made a little slightly curved line around the neck area, and then a little puffy piece that comes out here. And we're creating like a scarf that he's going to be wearing. And then we're going to draw a little odd-shaped little oval piece here right in the center where there's going to be a big knot in his scarf, and then we're going to bring a couple of these pieces down here for the hanging part of his scarf, the two ends. Now, we want to draw it wide enough so that we can put some tangle patterns inside of there, but we don't want it to be ridiculously huge. So make it nice and wide where you can fit things in there. And that is going to be that. And now just below where we've added our scarf, we're going to bring a little line diagonally outward and curve that back. And then we'll do the same here on this side, just diagonally outward. And you're going to want to do it roughly the same size, and that's his little wings peeking out on each side. And then if I slide down here to his feet, right here at the bottom of this little line that we've created, we want to draw his feet. So we come down with a little ankle, and we're just going to give him two simple little toes to make this very easy to draw. So we bring one line down and curve it over. Bring that back like that. Now let's go back up to the face. And very, very simple here. We've got let's draw a little pencil line down the middle so we can kind of center our face. And we want to have a nice eyeball on each side. We want to make several circles here. So again, we're just penciling it in at this point. So try to get your placement and your sizing. Just very simple little orbs. And then we want to draw another orb inside of that is closer to the inside than it is to the outside. Just give yourself a little guide there. Hopefully you can see that. And then we want to draw one more inside of here, even smaller. Again, touching on the inside is what I'm calling this, and not on the outside. So we're going to have something about like that. And let's see here. We can let's make sure we're getting them in about the right spot that we want. Oh, mine's a little high, so I'm going to bring that down. I don't want him to look like he's cross-eyed or something, even though this is just a playful cartoon drawing. I want it to have more of a cute look rather than a deformed look. So we'll ink that. And then here in the center, we want to draw a triangle that comes out like that, and then comes down a little bit, not quite as much or as sharply as the top, And then one other additional little line there. We'll put a little dot on each side. That's going to be his nose. And now we have a couple last lines to do. So we want to start sort of in toward the center and draw up over the eye and down to the outside of his mouth. And you can reverse that in this direction over the eye. And we want that to come down like that. That gives him that little framing of his face. And here on the body now, I'm going to zoom back out just for a moment so you can see where we're going here with that. We're going to draw a line that shows his body and leaves that little white spot down toward the bottom. Or not toward the bottom. That leaves that white belly, I should say. And gives him that sort of penguin-y look. So now hopefully, if I zoom back in, you can see that. From bottom to top, we've got our little penguin character. So now that we have that, we can grab our pens and we start to ink. We want to get this inked in. So we'll add a few details as we go, but let's just get the outline in place. If you're happy with the overall shape, then we want to just draw that outline in so that we can ink that in. And if you need to spin your piece of paper, that's fine. I'm doing it mainly so that you can see here what's happening on camera. I'm going down there to the scarf, and now I'm going to draw the scarf. I'm going to give it a little bit of character as I do, just bringing that in around here. Just adding just the slight little details. Now here I want to have this big old piece. And now we can finish connecting. And then just from here, we're coming down, making a couple simple little hanging scarf pieces. Very, very simple. All right. Now we can continue down with his body. We're just kind of tracing along our pencil marks and fine-tuning any little imperfections that we see as we go, or that we think we see, and we want to correct or change. Sometimes our pencil sketch gives us that initial guidance, but it doesn't show us exactly what we want it to do. So we're just connecting all these lines, making the pieces come together so that we can fill it with our Zentangle patterns. All right, let's draw the little wings here. And of course his feet. Alright, and now we have to finish up his face. So we want to get those details as accurate as we can on the face, just because that's kind of the fun part. That really gives him his character. Alright, so far so good. We'll put our two little dots right here. And I'm going to add just a couple little hatch marks on this bottom part just to give it that impression of a shadow on that already. A little more character as we go. And now let's draw our outer eye. And that's our biggest circle that we said. We've got those, and now we're going to draw that inner eye, leaving some space there. And they don't have to be identical, of course, but we want them to be similar. All right, there we go. And now let's add some hatch marks to this second layer of circle. Just to kind of fill in some character to his eye here. Again, this is a cartoon drawing, a doodle drawing, so we don't need super detail. Now, as we do with the pupil, let's leave a little circle, another tiny little circle, right toward the center. Look, toward the inside again and up. And then let's ink in that inner larger circle. Okay, let's start with our Zentangle on the scarf. So I'm going to zoom in here for you so you can see a little better what's happening. And the first thing we want to do is create some dividing lines on this scarf because we don't want to fill the whole piece with one tangle. So let's draw some lines that kind of follow the curves of our scarf, if you've done like I've done here. And let's just add a couple dividing areas. They don't have to be perfectly symmetrical, of course. But just create a couple areas that we can fill with different tangles. And let's do the same on these pieces hanging down. Let's maybe add one dividing area per section. So we'll add one there. And let's add one over here. Now for the first tangle that we're going to add, we're going to put it right here in this knot, this center knot piece, and the tangle is called Narfellow. And again, as always, I will have the names for all the tangles used in this drawing in the description box for the video. But Narfellow is designed by just making some wavy lines that are parallel to one another, and that will follow all the way through this piece, this knot here, if you will. Just like that. And now everywhere that we have a little bump or wave, we're going to connect to those other bumps. So here's a bump and here's a bump. So I'm going to connect that, and then here's a bump and here's a bump. I'm going to connect that. And it just creates a very simple little recurring pattern or repeating pattern here throughout this little knot. And if we want to, we can make that last one there as well. And it might even have one right here. Let's just add that in just for completeness. So now that's the basic of Narfellow. But we're going to do a little additional details to it just to make it more interesting on his scarf here. I'm going to follow inside this central piece back and forth with just some thin lines, alternating back and forth on each side until that little area is full, almost making it look like threads or little bundles of straw or whatever you might like to think of there. But it just adds a little bit more character to that piece. Tangles that we're using here are not chosen for any particular reason. They don't look like anything. They're not designed to be a scarf or a penguin. This is just treating this penguin that we've drawn as the string from our tile. So if you're familiar with Zentangle art, you know that when you draw on a regular tile, like the standard Zentangle tile, you create a border and then you draw a random or even a purposeful string, a series of lines that separate that drawing surface into areas where all the tangles are placed. And that ultimately is what we've done here with our doodle art. We're simply using this penguin as our string, and we're going to fill different areas with tangle patterns. And so like a regular Zentangle drawing, those tangle patterns could be random, they could be purposeful, etc. In my case, they're random. I've just selected a handful of these ahead of time that we're going to fill in with. So if you prefer different tangles, if you want to make your drawing very unique and make it your own, you can go ahead and do that, or you can just follow along as I'm going to do here. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to place a standard tangle called Printemps, which is the little spirals or springs, and I'm going to fill one of these sections with some Printemps shapes. I don't want them to become huge or overpowering in my case here, but I do want to fill this area with that discernible Zentangle pattern. So I'm just layering these in here, drawing behind where I'd like, layering them together, and just filling this space on his scarf. And I realize that these areas are somewhat small. That's part of the reason I expanded it onto this larger sheet of paper. But you could draw this on a tangle or on a Zentangle tile. You could draw it on a full sheet of paper. The idea is, though, very simply, that I wanted you to see that you can take one of your own humble, or I'm not to say your drawings are humble, but if they're like mine, they're very humble. Take one of your own little doodle drawings, in this case of a penguin, and you can fill it with Zentangle patterns and create a really fun, unique type of drawing. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm just inking the few spaces that remained where the Printemps shapes were not able to fill it in without just becoming a bundle of lines or a mess of lines. And so I'm just inking in those little spaces called interstices that hide behind or around the edges of these Printemps shapes. It'll just help give a little more character to that area as well, that little piece that we've drawn. Let's go over to this piece right here. We'll kind of just go opposite sides. And let's do crescent moon. So we'll start in a corner and we'll make a little half moon shape. And we'll ink that. Used to be, we would call this a ladybug shape, and that's fine. But it didn't really look like a ladybug there, so I just called it a half moon. I'm going to turn my paper here to make it easier for you to see. And then we'll make an aura. And another, and another. We'll do 3 auras. And then we'll find another spot, and we'll make our little inked in area, and we'll do 3 more auras. And we'll just fill this whole area in with the crescent moon shape. Just like we would do in a traditional Zentangle tile, but we're just doing it on our penguin shape. We're using these patterns to fill space. And one of the fun things about original Zentangle, I realize a lot of folks have kind of taken it in different directions, but one of the fun things is that it's completely random. You don't have to have a composition. You just fill space with your patterns. On this very bottom section, let's add a few stripes. Give yourself enough space to do some fun things here. And then we're going to add some circles to this that cross over these boundaries. And maybe there's even some just peeking into different spots here. Like that. And now, this pattern, by the way, is called Stricles, which is a combination of stripes and circles. And it just creates a fun little illusion. So now let's pick a spot here. In fact, I might draw one more line here just to keep mine a little more consistent. And I'm going to ink in the circle parts in here and leave the bar or the stripe white. And now here I ink in the stripe, the bar, and leave the circle white. And we'll just alternate that. Now on this side, let's create some drama as well. So we need some ink. Let's do this piece right here on the bottom. And let's put Diva Dance down in here. So what we'll do, I'm going to create a couple little ladybug bumps here over on that left side. Then I'm going to aura and follow those little bumps around like that. I wonder if I can give you a little better view even yet. This is really zoomed in here. And now I'm going to create a little ink spot here, opposite of where the other ones were. And just follow with an aura. And then I can create some little ink spots in different areas again, trying to alter that so it's not always in the same place. And we're going to just follow along here, along this line, alternating with an aura in little inked areas. Now there's all kinds of different versions of Diva Dance, but this is just one simplified form that we can use here. And there's no right or wrong place to put the little spots. Doesn't matter how many or how few you have. We just want to follow this alternating kind of pattern, inking different areas and creating the aura around them to create some wavy lines and little bits of movement here and there in this pattern. And like I said, there are multiple ways this can be used, but for our purposes here, this will work quite nicely. And while we're here working on the end, let's add another little tangle. This is called Fescu. And we're going to just add a few little lines that come out with a little heavier weight at the end. And you can give them a little character if you want. Just kind of like this little guy's got some fringes hanging off the edge of his scarf. And it gives us a chance to add another tangle. We'll do the same to this end. Like I said, it's just another way for us to put a fun little tangle on there. We're just using these tangles in this instance as little decorations. Let's do a couple Mookas here in these two areas so we can vary how we do them. Mooka, remember, is this shape that has a stem, and we come up and we make a little ball, and then we go back to where that stem came from. So I'm going to alter these here in a few ways, a few directions I should say, just to make it interesting hopefully. And I'm just going to fill a few of those in, and then where I think I've got room, I'm going to try to squeeze one more in there. Let's do that here on, whoops, I'm sorry, on this side as well. We're just creating some different tangle patterns to fill different areas. You don't have to do it like I'm doing it. You can do it completely differently. You can arrange your patterns different. You could use different patterns. But if you like what I've got here, then you can follow that along and copy that. Now, we're going to just embellish this. I don't really want to try to squeeze little tiny ones in there, so I'm just going to make little lines to fill these areas to give it a little additional pattern to it. And so now on these little areas, let's do patterns that we don't see used a whole lot. I'm going to use one called Tripoli. This is, we start with a triangle, and then we just aura one side of that triangle, and we keep making more triangles. And we leave a little space in between it, in between these triangles. And don't worry about them being perfectly symmetrical or perfectly auraed. I'm just using this as a pattern to fill space. There's no such thing as the pattern police that are going to come along and say, you know what, you've violated the proper laws here, and we're going to have to take you in because you have drawn your shapes in a way that's unacceptable to the World Shape headquarters. No such thing. No such thing. So you cannot have to worry about that at all. And I'm going to now take, I like how that looks at the end there, so I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. I like that. I'm going to put it right over here the same way, at least the same pattern. Obviously it will come out differently. And let's do one called, if I remember right, I think it's called Keeko. And what we'll do with Keeko is we're going to start here along the line because it'll make it a little easier. And we want to draw 3 little hatch marks. And then right next to it, 3 little hatch marks going in the opposite direction. And then we'll repeat that. You leave just a tiny bit of space between them, and you can see it creates this interesting pattern. Now we'll go up above it, and we just alter it. So these are going vertically, so now above that we're going to go horizontally and do the exact same thing. And we just then reverse or do the opposite. And this just creates an interesting little woven type look to it, which goes well with our scarf motif here. And then we'll just do as much as you can in terms of fitting these in. Just like that. And so now that section is done. And I kind of like the looks of that with all this other going on. I think I'm going to do that same thing on mine right next to it. It'll just give it some uniformity or some symmetry there, and I think that might be kind of neat. So I'm going to do the same thing. If you have a different pattern that you think would look great there, you go right ahead and put that in. But if not, you're free to continue following the guide that I've used here, that I've shown you. So that's looking pretty good. We've got a really nice Zentangled scarf that our little pal is wearing here. And so now we're going to start to fill in our penguin itself. So primarily we're going to fill in the area that would be black on a real life penguin. We're going to work on that. So we'll probably leave his feet and wings for right now. And let's just see what we can come up with here for our design. So now let's start working on the face of the penguin, and we want to do, it's technically not a tangle, but it's based on a tangle called Flukes. And what I want you to do is sort of aura or mirror the shape of that beak, and we're going to come up and make some points that stay roughly in the center of our little guy's face there, and we're going to go up until we get about to the top of those eye areas, and then we can add some additional pieces that will stay centered. And let's move these outward a little bit, and then we can create these little triangular shapes, almost like mountain peaks that poke out of each other here. And we're going to bring these out a little bit so that we can make a nice curve around his face here. And then what we want to do is just create a little bit of a darker spot up in that, like a diamond, up in the peak. And this is a tangle type pattern, like I said, but it's not. Normally Flukes is done on a grid, but drawing a grid here I think would be more challenge than it's worth. So we're going to just sort of freestyle it and create some little shapes that'll give character to his face here. Now what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to continue this general pattern, but I'm going to start relaxing it a little bit so that it curves out. It gives me a little more flexibility with how I make around the corner of his head here, or his eyes rather. Just kind of bringing those shapes outward and not really worrying about all the little details that could come into play here. So I'm doing this and just filling in this area as sensibly as I can, given that we're working around a corner. Just kind of filling in some details. They don't have to be perfectly symmetrical or anything like that. So once we get that sort of coming around the corner there, maybe I'll just add one more set there. So let's take here and we're going to make a little S curve. Comes around like that, and we're going to go down a little bit. If you saw my video on the narwhal tile or tangle, this is very similar to one step of the narwhal. I'm just using a very simple curved line that is going to define a couple areas for us here. It almost makes it look like we're going to put braids in his hair, but he doesn't have hair, he has feathers. That's okay. And now we're going to do the same thing in the opposite direction here. So I'm just creating these little curved lines that come down to the outside of that predefined area. Just like that. And now I know here I can add another one of those. And I think what I'll do on these extra ones, I'm going to add a little bit of an extra line in there just to give it a little more life or body, so to speak, to these pieces that didn't have that little center dark spot. And this is part of creating as you go. Sometimes you think, well, that looks good or that doesn't look good. But we're just trying to use these tangle patterns in unusual ways or unique ways that surprise us. Because normally you wouldn't think, well, let's fill a character with all these shapes. But it just gives us the opportunity to do two kinds of art simultaneously. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little seed shape in the center, roughly in the center of these little areas that I've just created. And that little seed shape will now have little orbs in it. And I'm starting in the middle and I'm drawing the orbs as much as I can fit in there. This is a small area, so take your time. Draw with whatever precision or detail you like, or you could just color in those seed shapes to add some contrast or drama there. So we have that, and now I'm going to add just tethered aura lines on each side of that little seed shape that I originally drew, just to create some more pattern here. This is what Zentangle is, right? It's pattern drawing. And we're just adding patterns that will complete our little guy here. Now he's got some wild and crazy Zentangle stuff going on. I wonder how well he would be accepted in the penguin community. Hopefully they would find him to be a remarkable character. Maybe he would be voted to be the leader of the next penguin migration. Or maybe he becomes an art teacher, referring to his own makeup as the source for their inspiration. Who knows? But as we draw this, we get an opportunity to relax, to get a little Zen flow as we create these patterns over and over, as we make choices to our decisions about how we want our character to look. We're developing our creativity and having some fun with that. Now I think what I'm going to do up top here is in these areas where there aren't those little leaf shapes, I'm going to create some auras there too. It will just help fill in that area, not make it look so empty, and give this overall little guy some additional qualities to all these little patterns that we're filling in here. Now let's focus on his wings or arms, if you want to think of it that way, and we're going to do the same pattern in both of those just for kind of a consistent mirroring look. It's a tangle pattern called binary, and if you know anything about binary numbers, they're all zeros and ones. So we're going to do some zeros and ones here right across. And just kind of follow that, and then on top of that, we alternate. And we just are going to build this up as we go. Alternating, working our way up toward the top, or shoulder if you want to think of it that way. Just take your time. Build your process here. And of course, some of it's going to disappear behind other areas. Just like that. And now, the second part of this tangle is to create a little inner circle inside these other ones. And if you don't have room to do the whole thing, give the impression of it. It'll help complete this pattern as far as the basic version of it. And now if you want, you can also add weighting to the bottoms of these areas if you think that would help. Or add some character or some difference to it. Just add a little bit of heavier ink to these areas. It's not required, but if you think that would make your pattern look a little more interesting, you feel free to go ahead and do that. I'm just doing a little bit there so we get a little more visual contrast in our drawing. So here I'm going to start the same process and work up this other arm now. Now as we get to the body, let's do something that will help us here. We want to create 3 dots as we go down, and you can see me do it here in a moment, on each side roughly in the middle. So we're going to go down a little ways, create a dot. Roughly the same distance again, and a dot, and the same again, and a dot. And we want to do something very similar on this other side. Now that we have those dots, we can use them as a guide to draw some seed shapes. And we're just going to connect these pieces as we go down. And the last one we'll just take right down to the edge there. We didn't draw a dot, but we can do it. Now I've tried to curve it just a little bit to follow this curve, just to make it a little more natural looking part of his form there. But that's not required if you didn't do that or prefer not to do that. All right, now that we have that, we want to draw a simple line, a nice thin line down the center of this little seed shape that we've made, just like that. And then we want to draw a little upside down V's, if you want to think of it that way. And we're going to make little leaves or feathers. Obviously feathers makes more sense, but I don't know if you think it looks like a feather or not, so we'll just do it like this. And create these all the way down, up and down on both sides of our character here. Now that we have these two rows, we want to continue to add more details and more patterns here, obviously. So I'm going to put another dot, dot, and a dot roughly there, and draw a second set of seed shapes that bump right up against this. There would be a dot or a little ball of sorts right there with a line, and that would come down. Let's draw that line all the way, and we can put a ball or a dot there. And this, although it's not exactly the same as the Tangle Pheasant, we could say clearly that it was inspired by that and is loosely based on that, and it's going to give that look. And what we'll do here is the same pattern, just with this line coming down off the edge of our leaf patterns, just like that. And then if we want, we can do a final seed shape. We'll continue this on the outside here now as well. So I wasn't originally sure if I would use this Tangle pattern, Pheasant, but I think I like it now that it's there. What we'll do is continue the same exact thing on this opposite side. I'm not going to do tangle patterns in these areas or in his feet, but we do want to do something so that it's not just flat white. So what I'm going to do is make very simple little hash marks kind of randomly around that make it look like there's this presence of feathers or texture of some kind here. Just some random little spots. You don't want to put too many because then it's going to look like he's covered in these things. But we want to do that also now down here to his body. Just little tiny marks, varying them slightly here and there. And try to be as random as you can. I know it's probably impossible for the human brain to do something truly random, but we don't want to. We want to try to avoid creating a specific pattern other than the sense of these little feathers. And so that sort of gives him a little bit different character as we look at him. It's just not so blank there. Now on his feet, we want to add just a couple details that might indicate some sense of shape. I'm going to add a little bit of a hatching around the outside and inside edge here of his feet. Just a tiny, just a tiny little bit, and just adding a tiny little bit of an ankle there, if you will, just to give the sense of shape so it doesn't look quite so flat. Just some little teeny tiny hatch marks. Now, as a final step, I think it will be fun to add some color to our piece. So I'm going to start up here on his face, and I'm going to add yellow to his eyes, to this outer edge only. I'm just using my art markers here, my alcohol markers. You could use colored pencils, Sharpies, gel pens, whatever you'd like. Just add some color and have some additional fun with your drawing, and then we'll add shading once our coloring is in place. So I'm just adding a hint of yellow around those eyes. I'll leave the white and the black as it is. And now what I want to do also is sort of a yellow-orange. So it's not completely bright orange, but it's got some yellow in it. And I want to add that to his beak. So kind of around the edges and down here where it's a little darker in the shadow. Like that. And then I'm going to add that yellow right back in here, and we'll kind of blend that. It'll just help give it a little sense of shape there. And I'm also going to do the same orange to his feet. All right, now I'm going to take a very light blue, and I'm going to color in the entire scarf. I normally don't want to color over the area here that's been inked with black, but I am going to use a shade of gray that will just help convince us that this is that area on the penguin that is darker, that is the black area, but it will still allow all of my patterns to show through without any sort of hindrance. Now, if you don't have gray markers, you could use colored pencils that are gray. Just use a nice light tone that doesn't overtake all the art that you've drawn here, all these patterns and all the stuff that you put in there. We don't want to lose all that, but you could add some sorts of shading with those colored pencils that would help do the same effect. And lastly, you could even use just a standard pencil and use a paper stump and blend this whole area with a very light shade of graphite to also do the same thing. We can set our pens aside. Let's grab our shading graphite pencil, and we're going to add some details here. And now lastly, we can add some, let's give him a little bit of ground to stand on. It'll just make him look like he's not floating here on the page. So we'll add some darker graphite right around the feet. And underneath them here where his shadow would be on the ground. Hopefully this project today has given you some insight into your own creative options. Not only can you turn a cartoon into a Zentangle piece of art, but you can take any doodle that you draw, any character, any shape that you'd like to fill with Zentangle patterns, you can do so. It gives you a chance to practice your Zentangle art, but also to have fun creating other types of interesting characters and pieces. Well, thank you so very much for joining with me today. I hope that you had fun. It was my pleasure to share this with you, and I look forward to seeing everyone again real soon back here in the Tangles and TOONS channel. Until then, take care now. Bye-bye.